The Netherlands is a country in the northwest of Europe. It might be small in size and population-wise, but it is an extremely wealthy country and it has a very rich history. A somewhat questionable history maybe, but a very rich history nevertheless. At some point in history, the Netherlands was even the #1 superpower in the world. Now fast forward to today. Last week something happened in Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands, that seems to be very revealing to the status of the country at the moment. Now I already posted a video about what happened last week in Amsterdam. So Israeli hooligans were marching through the streets of Amsterdam, causing all kinds of problems and then getting attacked by local residents. Now I just wanted to revisit that story a little bit and take a look at it from a slightly broader perspective, because something very interesting seems to be going on. Now virtually every Western mainstream media outlet has framed the story about what happened in Amsterdam last week unequivocally as anti-Semitic violence, and they even called it an anti-Semitic pogrom. And also most Western world leaders were very quick to jump on this story and to strongly condemn this horrific anti-Semitic behavior. And very subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, everything was blamed almost entirely on the Muslim population of, in this case, Amsterdam. All of a sudden, this was an immigration problem, and it was all about the failure of the Netherlands to integrate these Muslim people. And with all this information coming from the Western mainstream media and Western politicians, like always, probably the majority of the people in the West were brainwashed to go along with this narrative. Now, what we've been witnessing since last week is probably the best demonstration of the extreme importance of independent media, because only through independent media has the truth been coming out. And it's been pouring. There have been dozens and dozens of reports by independent media about what actually happened in Amsterdam last week. Now, one of the best, if not the best report was done by a 16-year-old YouTuber who calls himself Bender. Now, this video alone will very clearly reveal that the narrative that Western mainstream media and Western politicians have been trying to push upon us is simply false. It's very misleading, and I dare say it is outright disinformation. Now, one of the clearest pieces of evidence of disinformation by Western mainstream media and Western politicians revolves around this piece of footage. This was shot by a local independent reporter called Annette de Graaf. This footage was used by numerous mainstream media outlets like CNN, BBC, and also the Dutch National Broadcasting Association, the NOS. They all used this footage, or I should say misused this footage, to illustrate that Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters were attacked by locals only because they were Israeli, when in fact this footage shows exactly the opposite. It's showing Israeli hooligans chasing and beating up innocent people in Amsterdam. Only because of independent media do we now know that these Maccabi Tel Aviv hooligans went to Amsterdam, started marching the streets of the city. They started singing these very vile, racist, anti-Arab songs. They started tearing down Palestinian flags from buildings. They burned flags. They threw rocks at buildings that had Palestinian flags hanging from the windows. They molested innocent people in the streets of Amsterdam. They grabbed steel pipes from a construction site, which they then used to throw at passing police cars. They attacked police officers. They brutally beat up a taxi driver. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And only when the citizens of Amsterdam started to push back and kicked some of their behinds, only then the politicians and the mainstream media responded and cited anti-Semitic violence. Now, the Dutch government, which by the way is very much right-leaning at the moment, seems to be putting all the blame on the Muslim population of Amsterdam. Every political discussion at the moment in the Netherlands seems to be about immigration and integration, and some politicians are now even suggesting stricter measures especially for Muslims of course, to protect the Jewish community. Now don't get me wrong, of course it's a fundamental responsibility for any government to do everything in its power to protect its own citizens, and that of course includes the Jewish community. However, taking one step back and looking at all of this from a slightly broader perspective, let me get this straight. So, a group of Maccabi Tel Aviv hooligans from Israel goes to Amsterdam to terrorize the streets of the city. And the final result of all of this is that now members of the Dutch government are discussing possibilities for stricter measures on its own citizens to protect Jews from Muslims? So I guess my question is, exactly how much leverage does the Israeli lobby have over the leadership of the Netherlands? It must be quite a bit. I mean, if you're willing to protect Israeli hooligans terrorizing your streets before protecting your own citizens, if you let mainstream media report on this story in a way that does not reflect reality but is only meant to protect the reputation of Israel, and if you, the political class of the Netherlands, are trying to sell that same false narrative to your own citizens, there's something really wrong here. It seems like the Dutch government has lost control of its own country. And of course, the Netherlands has already been gobbled up by the EU. Whatever the EU decides overrules Dutch law. The EU in turn is very much dependent on the United States. And then now we have this absolute submission to the Israeli lobby by the Dutch authorities. So it very much seems like this once so mighty nation that at one point was even the #1 superpower in the world has lost its independence. So my question, which by the way is also very relevant for probably most Western countries, and that is this: does the Netherlands even still really exist? Think about that.